Yahweh gave a provision. Second month, it was that important to be in Jerusalem to keep the Pesach, along with the two other pilgrimage feasts, Shavuot and Sukkot. Where has Yehovah placed his name? During the days of the Shaphatim, or the judges, and in the days of Yehoshua, there were various places among the tribes where the altars were. Whether they were allowed to offer the Pesach at these places, we're not sure, but they were allowed to offer up the various sin offerings and praise offerings, thank offerings, heave offerings of that nature on these altars. So it's very possible that they could offer up the Pesach there as well. When David became king, he moved the tabernacle to his city upon the hill, and it remained there until Shlomo built the temple in Jerusalem. And from that point on, we see in passage after passage after passage that Yehovah placed his name in Jerusalem. Now, if we were allowed to keep the Pesach anywhere we want to, I guess Yehoshua could have decided, I don't want to go up to Jerusalem to keep the Pesach. But he knew that it was so important to keep the Torah that he went up to Pesach, or went up to Jerusalem for Pesach. Now, let us look at when do we celebrate the Pesach. The traditional view of Judaism and many in the Hebrew roots movement is that the Pesach was killed during the afternoon of the 14th toward the end of the day. And it was then eaten after sunset on the 15th, and Pesach is conjoined with Chag HaMatzot according to this view. I don't think that that's what's stipulated in the Torah. In oral Torah, maybe, but in the written Torah, it's not. Now, some say that the lamb was killed after sunset on the 14th, and then it was eaten after dark on the 14th, at the beginning of the 14th. According to their time clock, the next day is still the 14th until sunset. So some even have told me that we eat the unleavened bread with the Pesach meal, but after daylight on the 14th, we're allowed to finish off the rest of the unleavened bread in our house, or the leavened bread, in our house, and eat it, get rid of it, before sunset when the 15th starts. To me, that's a stretch of an imagination. Let's look and see what the scriptures say. 16:1 of Deuteronomy, Devarim, the Pesach is to be observed in the month of the Aviv. Not in the month of Aviv, but in the month of the Aviv, as we read earlier. The lamb was to be selected on the 10th day of the month and inspected for blemishes for 4 days. Exodus 12:3, speak to all the congregation of Israel, saying, on the 10th day of this month, each one of them is to take for himself a lamb, according to the house of his father, a lamb for a household. And then it goes on and says that that lamb must be a first-year lamb, and it's to be unblemished, and so they would inspect it. The lamb was sacrificed, or to be sacrificed, between the two evenings. And yes, the word two is in the Hebrew, contrary to some people's opinion. It's brought out in the fact that the word Bein Ha'arba'im, the word Ha'arba'im is the Hebrew dual of Erev, with the Ha, or definite article, attached at the front of it. And it means 2 evenings. So between the 2 evenings on the 14th, and it is eaten that same night. with unleavened bread and the bitter herbs. And we see this in Exodus 12:6-8. Bein ha'arba'im is the time we know today as the afternoon. This fits perfectly with the death of the Messiah. He died Bein ha'arba'im. The little evening, as it was called, was just shortly after noon, and the big evening was at sunset, before as the sun set. It is not the period after sunset and before total dark. That is not Bein ha'arba'im. We know this from various passages which say that the lamps in the tabernacle and later in the temple were trimmed during the time of Bein ha'arba'im. They did not light the candles after dark. They were lit constantly, for one thing. They never went out. But in the afternoon, usually around 3 o'clock in the afternoon, at the height of the sun, the heat of the day, they would go in and they would trim the lamps to make sure that they remained lit until the next day, refilling the oil receptacles and such. As we said earlier, the lamb was to be roasted in fire and to be complete, and none of the flesh was to remain at daybreak, which began the day of the 15th. Now, very important question. Did Yehoshua celebrate the Pesach Seder on the night he was betrayed? In a word, no. According to the Torah, it was not possible for Yehoshua to have eaten a Seder meal with his disciples on the night he was betrayed. The priest, first of all, would not have allowed him to bring the Pesach to the temple to offer up the day before it was to be done. The meal he ate was likely one of two meals traditional within the faith of his day. It was common for the teachers with disciples to have a teaching Seder the night before the regular Seder. This allowed the teacher to teach his disciples how to conduct the Seder properly, and it also allowed the disciples then to eat the Seder with their families. We know from the scriptures, and I didn't write this scripture down, but I'll post it online when I post this online, that, and I'll make myself a note of that right now or I will forget. There were more people at this meal than the 12. Okay, I got myself a note so I don't forget. This was a common thing to do, and this would be something that Yehoshua would have done. There's also the possibility that I read of what is called a Seudat Mitzvot, a celebration of the mitzvot, and this was a festive meal generally, or sometimes it was more of a somber meal that a teacher would give when his disciples, his students, his Talmudim had finished a cycle of the Torah and had read through. Interestingly enough, this makes sense because, first of all, Yehoshua's ministry, from the best estimates, was 3.5 years long. What is significant about that is that At that time, it is said that the Torah cycle was a 3.5-year cycle rather than the year cycle that we use today. So, if he started his ministry at the beginning of the Torah cycle, he had finished it at the end of another of this 3.5-year cycle, and at the end of his ministry of teaching before he was sacrificed. We also see that he ate leavened bread at the Pesach. I know people argue that the terms are used interchangeably, and they use the argument that the disciples, when he appeared to them on the seashore, he had bread and fish already prepared for them. If you look at the chronology, it was long after the festival of unleavened bread had ended. Leavened bread was given. Another clue that this was not the Pesach Seder was that when Judas had dipped the sop with him, they were asking, who's going to betray you? Is it one of us? Is it one of us? Is it me? Is it me? Is it me? And when Judas asked if it was me, he said, whoever dips the sop with me will be the one that betrays me. When Judas dipped the sop, again, something that soaked up the wine, not something that is done during a traditional Seder meal, but when he had dipped the sop with Yehoshua, Yehoshua told him, now, go do what you need to do and do it quickly. The disciples are discussing amongst themselves, what did he mean? What did he mean? What's he telling Judas to do? And some of them said, well, Judas is the treasurer, so maybe he's telling him to go out and give money to the poor, give alms, because this is a traditional thing to be done among even Jewish people today. During a festival, they would give alms to the poor to help them out, give them the opportunity to celebrate the festival. And then some of them said, well, maybe he's telling him to go out and buy things for the festival. Well, if they're already eating the Passover, why does he have to go out and buy things for this? Why does he have to go out and buy things for even the Passover or the Festival of Unleavened Bread the next day? Also, we have the religious leaders did not want to arrest Yehoshua during the Feast of Unleavens, so they arrested him before. And we see that Yehoshua was put to death on the 14th of Aviv, in the middle of the week. These religious leaders did not want to defile themselves by going into the court of Pilate on the 14th, because they were going to eat the Passover that night.